Welcome everybody to the Layman Law Review, and today we're going to be taking a look at some very blatant acts of extortion by Donald Trump. Before we get too deep into making any accusations, the first thing we need to do is take a look at the facts, so bear with me here. I'm going to be doing a little bit of reading from my notes, so cut me some slack. On March 14th, Trump issued an executive order titled Addressing Risks from Paul Weiss. For those that don't know, Paul Weiss is a law firm, and we are going to get into why Donald Trump hates this particular firm later on. But for now, let's just look at what the executive order said. To open up the executive order, Trump does a lot of his classic whining and crying. He complains about how this law firm has targeted him in the past and how they're evil and they're bad. But we don't really care about any of that. Let's just get into the substantive things that this order was trying to accomplish. For starters, the order states that, quote, executive departments and agencies shall immediately take steps consistent with applicable law to suspend any active security clearances held by individuals at Paul Weiss and Mark Pomerantz. I know that name Mark Pomerantz just kind of came out of nowhere. Give it some time, we're going to talk about him. But secondly, the order states that, quote, the heads of all agencies shall review all contracts with Paul Weiss or with entities that disclose doing business with Paul Weiss under subsection A of this section. To the extent permitted by law, the heads of agencies shall take appropriate steps to terminate any contract to the maximum extent permitted by applicable law, including the federal acquisition regulation for which Paul Weiss has been hired to perform any service. We're going to swing back around to that point in particular because it's a lot bigger than it sounds. The order also stated, quote, provide guidance limiting official access from federal government buildings to employees of Paul Weiss, when such access would threaten the national security of or otherwise be inconsistent with the interests of the United States. And last, but certainly not least, quote, refrain from hiring employees of Paul Weiss absent a waiver from the head of the agency. I know I just spat a bunch of words at you and you might not know what it all means, but let's break it down. That first line that I read to you, ordering that the executive departments and agencies suspend any active clearances of Paul Weiss employees, well, that kind of means exactly what I just said. Trump is ordering that the clearances of Paul Weiss employees be deleted. And the second line, the one that I said was the big boy, talking about reviewing and canceling contracts with Paul Weiss and then reviewing and canceling contracts with firms that use Paul Weiss. That's the big boy, so let's really take a look at that one. What that line translates to is that if any government agency or department has any contracts with Paul Weiss, maybe that be retaining them as counsel for X, Y, or Z, doesn't matter, any contract at all, they must be canceled. Which, as you can imagine, for a big law firm, that's probably a lot of money worth of contracts. And then the second part of that line, ordering the review of contracts with other firms that use Paul Weiss's counsel, well, that means if, say, you're a construction company and the government contracts you to build them a new office building, but you use Paul Weiss as your counsel, your contract is up for termination too. And contractors like that are not going to be willing to lose their government contracts. If you're a construction company and you specialize in building office spaces for government agencies, maybe on military bases or whatever, you are not going to be willing to lose those government contracts. So what you're going to do instead is you're going to fire Paul Weiss as your lawyers. The other three lines that I read to you aren't as important, so we're not going to break them down in detail, but essentially what they amount to is just other ways of punishing Paul Weiss. So what are you supposed to take away from everything that I just threw out at you? Well, basically, this executive order that Trump signed represents an extremely large monetary threat to this law firm, Paul Weiss. And you don't have to take my word for that. This is a quote from Brad Karp, the chairman of Paul Weiss LLP. Quote, the executive order could easily have destroyed our firm. In particular, it threatened our clients with the loss of their government contracts and the loss of access to the government if they continued to use the firm as their lawyers. Look, I know I said this video was about Trump committing the crime of extortion, and don't worry, we're going to get there. That's going to come full circle. Just give me a second. But look, as someone that loves and values the Constitution, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the absolutely blatant violation of the Sixth Amendment going on here. The Sixth Amendment guarantees everybody in the United States the right to counsel. And not just the right to counsel, but the right to the counsel of your choosing. And as Brad Karp pointed out in that quote I just read to you, this executive order means that if you want to keep your government contracts, you have to fire Paul Weiss as your lawyers. That's a clear violation of the Sixth Amendment. You have the right to hire whoever you want and not be punished by the government for that. Trump can't just come in and say, well, if you use that particular law firm, we're revoking all your contracts. The Sixth Amendment, like I said, allows you to use whoever you want to use as your lawyers, and the government can't say anything about it. They can't do anything about it. They can't step in like this and try to prevent you from using the lawyers you want. So yeah, this video is about Trump committing extortion, but he's also clearly committing a violation of the Sixth Amendment while he's at it. Like I said, I just had to point that out. But let's go ahead and get back to the extortion thing. So now we've covered everything that the executive order that Trump issued on March 14th does, Well, now let's talk about what happened next. On March 21st, Brad Karp, the chairman of Paul Weiss that we quoted a second ago, well, he met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And in that meeting, they came to an agreement where Trump would rescind the executive order that was monetarily damaging the firm. And in return, the firm would do a couple favors and make a couple promises to Trump. And this wasn't some like outback behind the barn deal that got made. Trump put all of this in his executive order rescinding the first executive order. So all the proof we need for this, we can just read in his writing. Well, I say his writing, but I think we can all agree that Trump probably doesn't write any of this. But that is beside the point. So let's go ahead and see what Trump made Paul Weiss promise him. There's a couple of things inside this executive order that are just kind of stupid and goofy and pointless. Like he makes them agree to the whole goofy, we're not going to use DEI anymore, and we're not going to target you politically anymore, and all that garbage that Trump's obsessed with. But the real heavy hitter is one particular line. Paul Weiss had to agree to, quote, dedicating the equivalent of $40 million in pro bono legal services. So to wrap up this series of events in a neat little bow, Trump issued an executive order that did a whole bunch of things that damaged this law firm monetarily. They were put into a position to lose all of their government contracts and lose a bunch of clients to prevent those clients from losing their government contracts. Essentially, Trump used his power to make this firm lose a lot of money. And then Trump agreed that he would stop attacking the firm, stop making them lose money, if they agreed to give him $40 million in free legal services. So we have Trump using his power to hurt the firm financially, and then making them give him something of value for free to stop hurting them. Now, what does that sound like to you guys? Maybe extortion? Well, I don't really know. Let's look at the definition of extortion. The dictionary definition is the act of obtaining something of value by using threats, force, or abuse of authority. Well, he certainly threatened them, and he certainly used force, at least monetary force, and abuse of authority. Yeah, I would say that checks out. And by using those things, he obtained something of value, $40 million in free services. So essentially, this situation perfectly maps onto the definition of extortion. So there's the situation laid out in a factual context. Now let's talk about a few more underlying things that are happening here. The first thing I want to talk about is that I told you earlier in the video that I would come back to why Trump hates this law firm so much. And that also comes back to that name Mark Pomerantz that popped up randomly earlier. Mark Pomerantz used to be a partner at the Paul Weiss firm. And in 2021, Mark left the firm to go work for the New York District Attorney's Office. And if you know your Trump history, around that time, the New York District Attorney's Office started prosecuting Trump for those 34 felonies that we're all so familiar with. So the long and short of it is, Trump was really, really upset that one of this firm's previous partners prosecuted him. So this whole situation was born of pettiness and revenge. So we've covered what he did and why he did it, but what are the consequences of all this going to be? Well, in terms of the consequences on the legal community, there is almost certainly going to be a humongous chilling effect among the law profession. The very idea that Trump could use his power like this to damage your firm financially just because you disagree with him or you try to fight him in court or he just doesn't like you, it's going to mean that a lot of law firms and a lot of lawyers aren't going to want to step up to the plate against him. And Trump actually issued a memo to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, giving her permission to put sanctions on lawyers that try to come after him in court or fight him in court or stand up to the guy in court. So yeah, he's already using his power to try to destroy lawyers that stand up to him. And when this situation with Paul Weiss was going down and that memo got issued to the Attorney General, one of Trump's allies and former White House strategist, Steve Bannon, was quoted as saying, quote, he's going to put those law firms out of business. What we are trying to do is put you out of business and bankrupt you. I mean, it doesn't get much more clear than that. He really gave away the whole game. If you stand up to Trump in court, if you think that something he's doing is illegal, if you think he's violating the Constitution, if you try to fight him in court, he's going to try to destroy your firm, put you out of business, bankrupt you, using his powers. I don't know about you, but that feels like a horrific misuse of presidential powers to me. All right, so I want to wrap this video up by talking about what the potential consequences for Trump are going to be. And the answer to that is nothing. Absolutely nothing. For one, Pam Bondi is the Attorney General, and even if Trump were to be charged with extortion, she's dropping that case. I mean, she's not taking that to trial. Absolutely not. But secondly, it won't even ever get that far. He'll never be charged with it. He'll never even be investigated for it because the authority to investigate a crime like this, these extortion crimes, is delegated to the FBI. Pursuant to the Hobbs Act, the FBI is in charge of these types of crimes. And as we all know by now, Kash Patel has been installed as the head of the FBI, and he's an absolute point blank, clear as day, Trump sycophant. He would never in a million years investigate or charge Trump for this. It would never happen. So he's going to walk away from this scot-free. Like, this is a clear, absolute, like, right out in the open, right in the sunshine crime. I mean, his actions perfectly map on to the definition of extortion. It couldn't be more perfect, really, which just goes to show how dangerous it is that Trump was allowed to install his sycophants into every position in government. I mean, if you think about it, if you really break it down with the way our system works, the way you're charged with the crime and then you go to court and you're prosecuted by the DA, the way he was able to install the people he did, where he did, he could probably do anything. Like, anything. But that's just where we are right now. I encourage each and every one of you, if you think that what Trump is doing is abhorrent, if you think this is monstrous behavior, share this video with your friends or just tell them about it yourselves. Make sure that everybody knows the types of horrible things that he's doing with his power. And so that way, when 2026 rolls around and it's time for midterms, we can destroy, absolutely annihilate the Republican Party in midterms. Take back the House, take back the Senate, regain some power, and do something about this. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and a comment on the video and subscribe to the channel for more of this. I absolutely appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here watching this, and have a great rest of your day.